I don't need another analyst telling me we're blind. I need a hacker. General Thorne's roar shook the sterile air of the Cyber Operations Command Center as red alerts flashed across the holographic map. The nation's digital defenses were crumbling against an enemy they couldn't even see. Sergeant Miller let out a cynical laugh, pointing to the corner where a lanky kid was trying to become one with the wall. Then send in Private Martinez, sir. He's a wizard with the cafeteria's coffee machine. The room filled with cruel snickers as they shoved the terrified-looking private toward the main console. They expected him to freeze, to fail. But 30 seconds after his fingers began to fly across the keyboard, something far worse happened. Every screen went black. Every system flatlined. The heart of their entire military network had been stopped. As alarms screamed and Colonel Rostova accused him of treason, they believed the quiet boy had just handed their enemy the keys to the kingdom. They had no idea he had just locked the enemy in a prison of his own design. The absolute blackness lasted for a full 3 seconds. It was a void so complete it felt like the universe had blinked out of existence. The low hum of the servers died, the glow of holographic displays vanished, and the hushed, tense whispers of the command staff were replaced by a single, collective gasp. Then, the emergency power kicked in. Blood-red lights bathed the Cyber Operations Command Center in a hellish glow, and a cacophony of alarms blared from every wall, a screeching symphony of total system failure. For a moment, everyone was frozen in disbelief. Then, chaos erupted. Analysts leaped from their chairs, shouting about lost signals and dead connections. Colonel Eva Rostova stood rigid, her face a mask of pure fury, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the central command table. The system she had spent a decade building, the fortress she considered impenetrable, had been snuffed out like a candle. And the cause was standing right in the middle of the room. "What did you do?" Rostova's voice was a low, venomous hiss that cut through the alarms. All eyes, filled with panic and rage, turned to Private Leo Martinez. Sergeant Rex Miller was the first to move. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of Leo's uniform and slamming him back against the now-dead main console. "You stupid little worm." Miller's face was inches from Leo's, his breath hot with rage. "This isn't a video game. You just killed us all." Leo flinched, his glasses askew on his face. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He was just a 19-year-old kid who was more comfortable with lines of code than with shouting, angry faces. The other analysts began to circle him like sharks that had scented blood. Their fear, which seconds before had been directed at an unseen enemy, now had a convenient, physical target. He bypassed the protocols, one shouted. "I saw him use a root command without authorization," another accused. Rostova strode toward him, her polished boots clicking on the floor with menacing precision. She waved Miller back, who released Leo with a disgusted shove. The colonel now stood before him, her arms crossed, her eyes scanning him with utter contempt. "Private Martinez," she began, her voice dripping with ice. "Let's review. You have no advanced degrees. You have no field commendations. Your security clearance barely allows you to reset my password. You were brought to this console as a joke, a mascot for our failure." She began to pace in front of him, addressing the entire room now. "And in 60 seconds, this child managed to do what no foreign enemy has ever done. He brought the entire global defense network to its knees. Did you trip and fall on the kill switch, Private? Or did your infantile brain mistake the primary server core for the delete key?" The laughter was sharp and cruel, led by Miller. "He probably thought he was turning it off and on again, Colonel." "Explain yourself, Private," Rostova commanded, her voice dangerously quiet now. "Give me the technical breakdown of how you achieved this catastrophic failure. Use small words. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself." Leo swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't crash it. The system was compromised. The enemy wasn't at the gates, they were already in the walls, rewriting the foundation. I had to trigger a hard purge of the core processes." Rostova stared at him for a beat, then threw her head back and laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. A hard purge? Are you a priest now, Martinez? Did you try to exorcise the code? She turned to General Thorne, who had been watching the scene with a thunderous expression. Sir, with all due respect, the private is delusional. He initiated a cascading kernel panic. In layman's terms, he took the system's brain and scrambled it into eggs. The data loss will be catastrophic. It will take us days, maybe weeks, to rebuild from backups, assuming the enemy doesn't gut us in the next 5 minutes. General Thorne finally moved, his large frame casting a long shadow in the red emergency light. He was a man who understood tanks and troops, not kernels and code. He understood chains of command and, most of all, he understood failure. He looked at the blank screens, then at Rostova, and finally, his gaze fell upon Leo, so small and insignificant in his ill-fitting uniform. This boy is your responsibility, Colonel, Thorne said, his voice a low growl. But he is my problem. He pointed a thick finger at Leo. Arrest him. I want him in a secure cell pending a full treason investigation. 2 armed guards started to move toward Leo. He looked around frantically, his eyes pleading. No, please, you don't understand, he stammered, his voice cracking. The system is clean now. It's safe. I just have to. Safe? Miller barked a laugh. It's a multi-billion-dollar paperweight. It's as safe as a corpse. The guards grabbed Leo's arms, pulling them behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He was being arrested, disgraced in front of the very people he was trying to save. He had seen the enemy's code, a digital cancer spreading through the network's bones, and had performed the only surgery that could save the patient. But to them, he wasn't a surgeon. He was a murderer. As they started to drag him away from the console, he felt a crushing wave of despair. He had failed. Not in his task, but in making them see. And in this room, perception was the only reality that mattered. As the guards pulled a stunned Leo Martinez toward the reinforced steel door of the command center, a single monitor on the far wall flickered. It glowed with a sickly green light, drawing every eye in the room. In the center of the screen, a line of text typed itself out in a stark, monospace font. Nice of you to turn out the lights for us. Makes it easier to work. A collective chill ran through the room. The enemy was talking to them. Before anyone could react, a second line appeared. We've finished our inspection. The property is ours now. We'll be moving in permanently in. Beneath the text, a digital timer materialized, its numbers glowing a menacing crimson, 10 o'clock. And it began to count down. 9:59, 9:58. The mockery of the message was secondary to its terrifying implication. Colonel Rostova's face went pale. They were waiting for a total system blackout, she whispered, horrified. It was the only way to bypass the final quantum encryption layer. He didn't just open the door for them. He handed them a welcome mat. Panic, cold and sharp, replaced the room's anger. The countdown was a death sentence. 10 minutes until what? Total data wipe? The launch of their own missiles against them? The possibilities were unthinkable. Get it back online. General Thorne bellowed. Now. Rostova and her team flew into a frenzy. They sprinted to backup terminals, their fingers flying across keyboards, inputting frantic commands. Miller ripped open a floor panel, trying to manually connect to the server core. No response, an analyst yelled. The entire network is ghosting us. Miller looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. She's right, Colonel. The OS kernel isn't just panicked, it's gone. It's like the code was erased from existence. There's nothing to boot. It's a brick. Try the tertiary backups. The ones in Cheyenne Mountain. Rostova commanded, her voice strained. Can't even connect to them, another tech replied, his voice shaking. The entire network architecture has been rewritten. The pathways don't exist anymore. We're locked out of our own house. The countdown continued its relentless pace. 7:45, 7:44. With every failed command, the blame circled back to Leo. He stood between his two guards, watching the chaos he had seemingly caused. But his expression had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by an unnerving, laser-like focus. He wasn't looking at the panicked officers. He was staring at the enemy's message, at the countdown clock. He wasn't watching a disaster unfold, he was reading a story written in code that only he could understand. The timer wasn't a threat. It was the enemy's own system process, a self-compiling program. They thought they were installing their own operating system. They had no idea they were installing it inside a cage. This is all on him. Rostova shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. Her carefully constructed composure was cracking, her professional reputation turning to ash before her eyes. He didn't just crash the system, he shattered its very foundation. It's fundamentally broken. No one can fix this in time. General Thorne watched his elite team, the best cyber warriors in the world, run around like headless chickens. He saw the timer dip below the 6-minute mark. He had no more options. All the experts, all the decorated officers, all the years of experience in the room were worthless. There was only the ticking clock and the disgraced private who started it all. He strode across the room, his face a thundercloud of desperation and fury. He got right in front of Leo, so close that Leo could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. The guards flinched but held their ground. "You," Thorne growled, his voice a low earthquake. "You did this. You will undo it." "Sir, that's impossible," Rostova protested, rushing to his side. "He's a saboteur or an imbecile. He doesn't have the knowledge or the clearance. Putting him back on that console could make things worse." Thorne ignored her. His eyes, burning with a cold fire, were locked on Leo's. "The experts have failed. The joke is all I have left." He grabbed the front of Leo's uniform, yanking him forward. "You have 5 minutes and 40 seconds, he snarled, gesturing with his head toward the crimson timer. "You will restore this network, and you will kick our unwanted guests out. If that clock hits 0 and you have failed, I will personally ensure you are not just dishonorably discharged. You will be tried, convicted, and executed for high treason before sunrise. Do you understand me, Private?" The room fell deathly silent, the only sound the soft, rhythmic beep of the countdown. It was an impossible challenge. A death sentence wrapped in an order. All eyes were on Leo Martinez, the quiet boy who fixed printers. Behind him, the clock ticked down with terrifying certainty. 5:39, 5:38. Leo has less than 6 minutes. 6 minutes to save a nation that has already condemned him, with the clock ticking toward his own execution. We've all been in situations where we felt underestimated, where the world judged us before we even had a chance to prove ourselves. If you believe that true talent can't be silenced and that courage is proven, not proclaimed, then do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. By joining us, you're not just watching a story, you're standing with every underdog who's ever been told they're not good enough. Let's see if he can pull this off, together. The clink of the handcuffs opening was unnaturally loud in the silent command center. General Thorne nodded curtly, and the guards stepped back, their faces grim. Leo Martinez didn't rub his wrists. He didn't even glance at the men who had just been ready to drag him to a prison cell. With an eerie calm that unnerved everyone in the room, he walked back to the main console, the tombstone of his career, the potential site of his execution. The timer on the green glowing monitor was now under 5 minutes. He sat down. The primary screen remained a black, lifeless mirror, reflecting his own pale, determined face. The room held its breath. They expected a flurry of desperate keystrokes, a frantic attempt to run diagnostics or force a reboot. Instead, Leo Martinez closed his eyes. For 10 agonizing seconds, he was perfectly still. His hands hovered just above the keyboard, his breathing slow and even. The only movement was the relentless tick of the countdown clock. Sergeant Miller let out a contemptuous snort. "What's this? Is he praying to the motherboard?" Colonel Rostova stared, her expression a cocktail of disgust and fury. She was convinced this was a final, pathetic display of passive aggression, a boy refusing to play a game he had already lost. But inside Leo's mind, it was anything but quiet. When he closed his eyes, he didn't see darkness. He saw the code. To him, the network wasn't an abstract concept, it was a place, a vast, three-dimensional cityscape of pure data. And right now, that city was in ruins. He saw the shattered remains of Rostova's firewalls, like the collapsed dome of a cathedral. He saw the communication lines, once brilliant highways of light, now twisted and broken like derelict bridges. And everywhere, crawling over the wreckage, was the enemy's code. He saw it as a chaotic, thorny vine, pulsing with a malevolent, alien logic. He wasn't looking for a way to repair the damage. He knew it was too late for that. Rostova's city, for all its grandeur, had been built on a flawed foundation, full of rigid rules and predictable pathways the enemy had easily exploited. He wasn't there to fix her city. He was there to build his own on its ashes. His eyes snapped open. The room gasped. His fingers didn't just move, they became a blur, a symphony of motion across the keyboard. The taps were so fast they sounded less like individual keystrokes and more like the drumming of a summer rain. He wasn't trying to guess passwords or find a backdoor. He was speaking the machine's native language. On the dead screen, a single character blinked into existence, a stark, green underscore. A command prompt. The sight sent a jolt through the room. Impossible, Miller whispered, his cynicism momentarily evaporating. The OS is gone. There's nothing to prompt from. Rostova's eyes narrowed, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. That's not a standard shell, she said, her voice barely audible. That's a direct hardware access command. A JTAG interface, but it's virtualized. That shouldn't exist. She recognized the language, but the dialect was something she had never seen before, something that felt both ancient and light years ahead of her. Lines of code began to pour onto the screen, flowing from Leo's fingertips without a single pause or backspace. He was writing with the flawless syntax of a machine, his thoughts translating directly into executable commands. The other analysts, the supposed experts, could only watch in stunned silence. They were looking at their native language, but it was being used to write poetry so complex they couldn't even begin to parse its meaning. "My God," whispered a senior analyst named Peterson, a quiet veteran who had been writing code since before Leo was born. "He's not calling any system libraries. He's not even using a precompiled kernel." Peterson's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and awe. "He's writing a new operating system, from scratch. Right now." The statement fell like a bomb in the silent room. Rostova felt the floor drop out from beneath her. What Peterson had just described was the cyber equivalent of designing and building a jet engine in mid-air during a nosedive. It was a task for a team of geniuses with months of planning. Martinez was doing it in minutes. A wave of professional nausea washed over her. He wasn't fixing her beautiful, complex system. He was treating it as nothing more than scrap hardware, a blank slate for his own creation. As the code streamed, other monitors around the room began to flicker to life. They didn't show the familiar graphical interface of the Global Defense Network. They displayed the same stark, text-only interface as Leo's console. He hadn't resurrected their network. He had created a new one, a ghost network built on the bones of the old. It was raw, minimalist, and completely under his control. The enemy's clock was still ticking. 3:21, 3:20. But now, it seemed less like a threat and more like a deadline for the enemy. Leo hadn't even begun to fight them yet. He had just finished building his arena. The oppressive red of the emergency lights was now mixed with the stark green glow of a dozen monitors, all displaying the same raw, text-based interface. The atmosphere in the command center had undergone a profound transformation. The air, once thick with panic and scorn, was now thin with collective awe. Sergeant Miller, who had been ready to break Leo in half minutes earlier, now stood with his jaw hanging slightly open, his eyes wide with disbelief. General Thorne was a statue carved from granite, his fists clenched at his sides, not in anger, but in a desperate, burgeoning hope. But no one was more transfixed than Colonel Rostova. She stood near the main console, watching Leo's hands, watching the impossible cascade of code on the screen. She was a master architect whose cathedral had burned, now forced to watch a god erect a new universe from the ashes. Every line of code he wrote was a refutation of her life's work, a testament to a level of understanding she couldn't begin to fathom. Leo's fingers paused. He typed a single command, map_entity trace hostile. On the main screen, the lines of code were replaced by a minimalist schematic, a web of interconnected nodes and pathways. It was the network, his new network, visualized as a pure data structure. A split second later, dozens of nodes glowed a pulsing, angry red. "There they are," Leo said. His voice, now amplified by the room's dead silence, was steady and confident. He wasn't a scared private anymore. He was a commander on his own battlefield. The map wasn't just showing their locations, it was displaying the very signature of their code. He could see their digital DNA. "He's mapped them," Peterson whispered, his voice trembling. "To do that, you'd have to understand their code as well as you understand your own. He's not just seeing intruders, he's reading their minds." The enemy, blind to this new, ghost network, was still trying to execute its original plan, still trying to navigate the hallways of a building that no longer existed. Now, Leo began to hunt. He didn't erect firewalls or launch counterviruses. Such methods were crude, loud, and predictable. That was Rostova's way. That was what the enemy would expect. Leo's strategy was one of terrifying elegance. His fingers resumed their dance, and on the schematic, pathways began to shift. It was as if he were an urban planner for a city of light, rerouting superhighways in real time. An enemy program would move down a familiar data stream, only to find it leading to a dead end. It would turn back, and the pathway it had just used was gone, replaced by a solid wall of inert code. "What is he doing?" Miller asked, his voice a choked whisper. It was Rostova who answered, her mind finally grasping the horrifying, beautiful logic of his actions. "He's trapping them," she said, her voice hollow. "He's rewriting the network environment around their code, in real time. He's not building a cage and trying to force them into it. He's letting them build their own prison, one dead end at a time." The enemy hackers, wherever they were, must have been experiencing a unique form of madness. They were inside the system, yet they could go nowhere. Every move they made, every command they issued, led them deeper into a labyrinth of Leo's making. They were ghosts trapped in a machine that was rearranging itself with every step they took. With the intruders isolated and neutered, Leo turned his attention to the heart of the threat, the program tied to the countdown clock, the self-compiling virus that was moments away from executing its final, catastrophic payload. The clock read 1:30. Again, he did the unexpected. He didn't attack the virus. He established a direct connection to it. A single line of text appeared on his screen, opening data stream to hostile entity. "Is he insane?" an analyst shrieked. "He's going to let it into his new system." "No," Rostova breathed, her eyes locked on the screen, a look of profound understanding dawning on her face. "He's not letting it in. He's feeding it." Leo began to pour data into the enemy program. Petabytes of it. It looked like random, useless information, excerpts from technical manuals, old weather reports, Shakespearean plays. But it was all perfectly formatted to mimic the core system data the virus was designed to consume and overwrite. The enemy's program, an apex predator, was being offered an endless, irresistible buffet. And its gluttony would be its undoing. Peterson gasped as he realized the genius of the strategy. The virus's final command is to compile and execute. But it can't execute until it has finished compiling all the data from the core system. He's giving it an infinite meal. It's bloating, becoming corrupt with useless information. He's drowning it in data. On the screen, a simple graphic visualized the health of the enemy program. The once lean, efficient code was now shown as a grotesquely swollen, misshapen mass. Its processes were grinding to a halt, choked by the sheer volume of junk it was being forced to integrate. The countdown clock hit 1 minute. 0:59, 0:58. The room was mesmerized. The private they had mocked, the boy they had been ready to condemn, was defeating a world-class enemy not with force, but with sheer, breathtaking intelligence. He hadn't just saved them. He had reinvented the very rules of cyber warfare in the span of 5 minutes. The timer continued to tick, a final, vestigial threat. The execution order it represented for Leo was still very much real. 0:45, 0:44. The crimson numbers on the countdown clock seemed to burn into the retinas of everyone present. 0:29, 0:28. The immediate threat of the virus had been neutralized, but the general's ultimatum had 2 parts: fix the system and eliminate the enemy. And the clock was still the final arbiter of Leo's fate. The air was thick with an almost unbearable tension. They had just witnessed a miracle, and now they were about to find out if it was enough to save its creator. Leo, however, was not looking at the clock. His focus was absolute. With the enemy intruders securely caged within his digital labyrinth and their primary weapon rendered inert, he moved to the final phase of his plan. His fingers, which had paused for a moment, resumed their impossible dance. The code that now flowed onto the screen was different. The previous streams had been elegant, creative, defensive. This was lean, sharp, and aggressive. It was the code of a predator. He wrote a small, brutally efficient script, barely 20 lines long. He named it hunter.sh. With a final keystroke, he deployed it into the maze where the hackers were now frantically trying to understand what had happened to them. "What's he doing now?" a junior analyst stammered, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. Rostova, her voice now a hushed, analytical monotone, answered before anyone else could. "He's not defending anymore. He's attacking." The hunter.sh script was a digital bloodhound. It ignored the trapped programs and focused on the faint, residual signal of the operators themselves, the faint trickle of data that connected them to their prison. It was their lifeline, their only way of seeing what was happening. It was also the rope Leo would use to find them. "He's attempting a traceback," Miller said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Through their proxy layers? With less than 20 seconds on the clock? That's insane. It would take us a week to unravel that kind of relay." But Leo didn't see a relay of layered defenses. In his mind's eye, he saw the architecture of their escape route. He saw the complex series of servers they were bouncing their signal through, a chain designed to be untraceable. But to him, the structure had a flaw. It wasn't a flaw in their custom hacking software, but in a tiny, insignificant piece of commercial routing hardware they were using in the middle of their chain. He saw it as a single loose brick in an otherwise impenetrable fortress wall. He didn't need to smash the wall down. He just needed to push that one brick. The countdown entered its final 10 seconds. 0:10, 0:09. Leo typed his final command. It was a single, perfectly crafted data packet, aimed not at the hacker's main server, but at the tiny, flawed router in their chain. Exploit route override ping_origin. 0:05, the packet hit the router. The exploit worked. For a single microsecond, the hacker's entire anonymizing relay was bypassed, creating a direct, unmasked line from their keyboard to Leo's. 0:04, the central holographic map of the world, which had been dark and dead for the past 10 minutes, flickered violently. A single point of brilliant white light bloomed on its surface. 0:03, the point of light resolved into a precise set of GPS coordinates. 0:02, a label appeared in stark, block letters, hostile origin detected, Port District, Sector 7. 0:01, General Thorne was already barking into his comms unit, "Strike Team Alpha, you have the target. Go. Go now." Midnight. The timer vanished, replaced by the word terminated. Simultaneously, a new window popped up on the main screen. It was a live video feed. A webcam. For a surreal moment, the command center stared at a group of 4 disheveled men in a grimy, concrete room, their faces illuminated by their monitors. They were looking at their own screens with expressions of pure shock and horror. Below the video feed, a final system message appeared, a report from the enemy's own network, remote system control achieved. All peripherals locked. The video feed played for 3 more seconds before the door behind the hackers was obliterated and armed soldiers flooded the room. The feed cut out. Silence. A deep, profound silence filled the command center. The red emergency lights had been replaced by the calm, steady white of the primary lighting system. The monitors displayed the clean, minimalist interface of Leo's new OS, humming along with perfect stability. The enemy was caught. The network was secure. The war was over. Leo leaned back in the chair, the tension finally leaving his body. He let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an eternity. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, the impossibly complex, 3-dimensional world of code receding, leaving behind only the stark reality of the room around him. He looked small again, just a kid in a uniform that was too big for him. He turned his head and looked at General Thorne, his expression uncertain, a silent question in his eyes. "Did I pass?" General Thorne stood motionless, his mind trying to process the digital miracle he had just witnessed. He looked at the coordinates on the map, at the confirmation of the strike team's success on his private datapad, and then back at the boy. The boy who had saved them all. It was Peterson who broke the spell. The old analyst started clapping, his hands hitting each other with a slow, deliberate rhythm. A second later, another analyst joined him. Then another. Then Sergeant Rex Miller, his face a mask of stunned respect, began to applaud. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in a thunderous, rolling ovation, a wave of sound that crashed over Leo, who could only sit there, blinking in the bright light, utterly overwhelmed. Every single person was on their feet, their applause a tribute to the quiet genius they had so cruelly misjudged. Everyone, that is, except one. Colonel Eva Rostova stood frozen, not clapping. She stared at Private Leo Martinez, her architect's mind shattered. In the space of 10 minutes, he had not only defeated an undefeatable enemy, he had made her, her career, and her entire understanding of the digital world utterly and completely obsolete. The wave of applause crashed over Leo, a disorienting roar that felt more intimidating than the general's threats. He shrank back in his chair, blinking against the sea of faces, faces that had, minutes earlier, looked at him with contempt and scorn, but now shone with a kind of religious reverence. He didn't know how to react. This was a social algorithm for which he had no script. The ovation finally died down when General Thorne raised a hand. The silence that followed was even heavier. Thorne walked slowly toward the console, his boots making soft, deliberate sounds on the polished floor. He stopped in front of Leo, who looked up at him like a student awaiting a final grade. The general, a man known for his iron wool and booming voice, seemed to be at a complete loss for words. He looked at the boy, then at the screens displaying the elegant, stable new network, then back at the boy. Finally, he placed a heavy, paternal hand on Leo's shoulder. Private Martinez, Thorne's voice was raspy with emotion, and far quieter than anyone had ever heard it before. "I have sent men into battle. I have awarded medals and I have buried heroes. But I have never in my life seen anything like what you did here tonight." He paused, his jaw working as he swallowed his pride. "My duty is to protect this nation. Your actions did that. My actions nearly cost us our best weapon. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. There are no words to properly apologize for that." Leo just nodded, his exhaustion evident. "I was just doing my job, sir," he said softly. The old architecture was too rigid. It invited a breach. I'd recommend we keep the foundational OS I built and start reinforcing the application layers with dynamic, non-Euclidean geometry. It'll make the pathways impossible to map from the outside. Thorne stared at him. The boy had just saved the world and averted his own execution, and his first thought was to go back to work and make the system better. He wasn't basking in the glory, he was already solving the next problem. As if on cue, Sergeant Miller shuffled forward, his face flushed with a deep, painful shame. He couldn't meet Leo's eyes, instead staring at a spot on the floor. "Private Martinez," he stammered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Listen. I was an ass. A complete ass. What you did, that was, hell, I don't even have a word for it. I'm sorry. For what I said. For what I did." Leo looked at the sergeant, a man who had delighted in his humiliation, and saw only a defeated bully. He gave a slight nod. "It's forgotten, Sergeant," he said, and the simple act of forgiveness seemed to wound Miller more than any rebuke could have. The sergeant just stood there, a relic of the old order, his authority and arrogance stripped away, leaving only his own profound sense of inadequacy. His career wasn't over, but his reputation was. He would forever be the man who mocked a genius at work. Thorne's gaze, however, had moved on, and it had turned to ice. It settled on Colonel Eva Rostova. She stood frozen, her face a pale, emotionless mask that did nothing to hide the storm of shattered pride in her eyes. "Colonel," Thorne's voice was dangerously level. "For 10 years, you have been the architect and warden of this fortress. You assured me it was perfect. You were wrong. Your system was fragile. Your diagnostic protocols were blind. And your professional judgment was fatally compromised by your own ego." He took a step toward her. "When the real solution to this crisis was presented to you, you didn't see an asset, you saw an insult. You were willing to stand by and watch this nation fall, and let this young man be executed, rather than admit that someone else, a private no less, knew more than you." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Every word was a hammer blow to her career. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your command of the Cyber Operations Command Center. You will turn over all security credentials and active case files to my staff. Your new commanding officer for the interim will be him. He pointed back at Leo. You will brief him on everything he needs to know. Is that understood? The collective gasp in the room was silent but universal. A colonel being summarily dismissed was one thing. Being ordered to report to a 19-year-old private was a public execution. Rostova's face, which had been pale, was now utterly bloodless. This was a humiliation from which she could never recover. She didn't salute. She didn't speak. She gave Leo one final, searing look, a look of pure, undiluted hatred mixed with a terrifying sliver of awe, then turned on her heel and walked out of the command center she had built. The heavy steel door slid shut behind her, sealing her fate. Her career wasn't just over. It had been erased. With Colonel Rostova gone, a strange calm settled over the command center. The adrenaline of the crisis had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of awe and a complete upending of the natural order. General Thorne, after giving a few quiet orders to his executive officer, officially placed the entire cyber defense infrastructure under Leo's authority. He gave the boy a long, respectful look, nodded once, and then departed, leaving the room full of elite officers to take their new orders from a 19-year-old in an ill-fitting uniform. Hours later, the sun had risen over the world outside the subterranean bunker, but down in the CCOC, a new day had dawned in more ways than one. The main command floor was humming with quiet efficiency. Analysts, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, worked to reinforce the new network, their actions guided by a clear and elegant set of directives. But their new commander was not there. Leo Martinez was not in Rostova's glass-walled office, with its panoramic view of the command floor and its large mahogany desk. He had taken one look at the opulent, sterile room and politely refused it. Instead, he had found his way to a small, disused server maintenance closet in the subbasement, a place the architects had designated for obsolete hardware. The room was cramped, cool, and filled with the steady, soothing hum of cooling fans. For Leo, it was perfect. He was there now, a portable monitor propped up on a stack of old server blades, a keyboard balanced on his lap. He had traded his uniform jacket for a simple t-shirt. Peterson and two other senior analysts, who had volunteered to be on his team, were crammed into the small space with him, sketching out network diagrams on a whiteboard they had wheeled in. The atmosphere was not one of military hierarchy, but of a late-night study session among brilliant colleagues. A young lieutenant, sent by Thorne's office, found them there after a half-hour search. He cleared his throat, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Provisional Commander Martinez?" he asked stiffly. Leo looked up from his screen. "Just Leo is fine." "Right. Leo, sir," the lieutenant corrected himself. "The general has authorized an immediate field promotion to the rank of major for you. We have a uniform ready. Also, your presence is requested for a debrief with the Joint Chiefs, and there are dozens of press inquiries." Leo held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "Thank you, Lieutenant, but could you just tell them I'm busy? This rank, the office. I don't need any of that. I just need a faster connection to the primary server farm and maybe a better whiteboard." He smiled, a genuine, slightly awkward smile. "And more coffee. We definitely need more coffee." The lieutenant stared, completely baffled. He was offering this kid fame, power, and prestige, and all he wanted was office supplies. He finally just nodded and backed away slowly, as if leaving the presence of a strange and unpredictable new form of life. Leo had been given the keys to the kingdom, and he had immediately driven to the library. In the days that followed, the story of the attack and its miraculous repulsion became a legend within the intelligence community. Colonel Eva Rostova was quietly and dishonorably discharged after a swift internal review. Her name became a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride. Sergeant Miller was reassigned to a remote monitoring station in Alaska, a place where his cynical attitude could do little harm. His public shaming was his true punishment. General Thorne, on the other hand, was lauded for his leadership. But the crisis had changed him. He instituted a new program, unofficially nicknamed the Martinez Protocol, which created an anonymous channel for any service member, regardless of rank, to flag critical security concerns directly to high command. He would never allow a genius to be silenced by bureaucracy again. At Leo's own adamant request, his name was kept out of all official reports. The world knew a major cyberattack had been thwarted, but the hero of the hour remained a ghost, a myth known only as the Architect. A week later, an encrypted message appeared on Leo's terminal in his now upgraded server room. It was from General Thorne. It contained a full presidential pardon for actions taken during a national security crisis, a formal notice for the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's highest military honor, and a one-sentence offer: "Name your terms." Leo read the message. He could have anything. A research lab, a private company funded by the government, a title, a fortune. He could write his own ticket to a life of power and prestige. He smiled, typed a short reply, and hit send. He then turned back to his primary monitor. On it, a stunningly complex, beautiful visualization of his new network spun slowly, a galaxy of light, secure and serene. He had asked for only three things: a permanent role as chief systems architect, full autonomy over his work, and a lifetime supply of the specific brand of coffee he liked. He didn't want to be a commander or a public hero. He just wanted to be an architect. And as he looked at the perfect, living system he had created, surrounded by his team, he knew he had everything he had ever wanted. He was home. Leo's story is a powerful reminder that your true worth isn't measured by a rank, a title, or the approval of those in power. It's measured by what you can do, by your quiet competence, and by the integrity you show when the pressure is on. He didn't need a fancy office or a medal to know his value. He found it in the work itself. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the Leo in the room, underestimated, overlooked, but secretly holding the key to solving the problem? Share your story in the comments below. Let's celebrate the moments when hidden talent silenced the loudest doubters. By sharing, you help create a community that believes in the quiet heroes. And if you want to be a part of this community, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more stories like this one.